As I mentioned earlier, I was involved in a lot of high-tech startups, some successful and some not so successful. In 2011, I realized that space, there's a transition happening in space. Oh, we have slides. Ever since the 50s, space was NASA, European Space Agency, Roscosmos. Congress made the decisions. NASA figured out how to do it and then hired companies to build it. All the projects were big, expensive, careful, and slow. Those are not necessarily bad, especially careful. Today, there are many countries. Last count, I think there were over 40 countries that had space agencies. Ecuador and Kenya have space agencies. The private sector is deeply involved now. We're driven much more by inspiration and less by risk management. I believe there's also a generational change. People were brought up on Star Trek, Star Wars, the sense that we can do this stuff, that space is not some remote weirdness that only scientists do, is no longer true. But one thing that new space is learning today, as I mentioned earlier, is accidents will happen, necessitating more formal systems and increasing both cost and time. SpaceX is learning that you have to figure out, you have to investigate every component, you have to test every component. Their ship failed because a single strut that was manufactured by one of their vendors had a strength of about 20% of its rated strength. I don't know the actual cost of that strut, what, a few $100s? So from now on, SpaceX will be more careful. They will test everything. That's going to increase costs. It's going to make things slower. And one of the results of that is going to be convergence. Orbital Sciences was originally an independent company. Now it's a division of ATK, so it's Orbital ATK. I think you'll see a lot more of that. I might get into that a little more later. How much time do I have? 20 minutes? Okay. So briefly on this slide, we're going to talk about some of these things. The technology is changing, the business models are changing, financial models are changing. So these were supposed to be on a different slide deck, so we'll skip through them. But this one, people may consider this familiar. This is Roosevelt Roads. It's not a very good picture, but this is possibly another spaceport. So let's talk about some of the new business models. Actually, I want to go back a bit here, just to this one. There are three kinds of spaceports. The traditional ones, Vandenberg, Canaveral, what's the one in Russia? Yeah, so there are repurposed ones. Wallops Island, parts of Canaveral, Pad 36 is now being run by SpaceX, I believe. And then there's the entrepreneurial ones. Mojave, where Virgin Galactic's work is being done. Spaceport America, New Mexico, and Puerto Rico could be one of those. That's one thing we've seen in engineering for the last 100 years is every time the electrical engineers come up with a new technology to work themselves out of business, it reduces the cost of electronics and increases the business and makes more business for engineers. Space is going to do the same thing. As costs go down, the demand for new launches, for new systems is going to expand, I think, exponentially, which is going to have global growth in both suborbital and orbital. So, now I'm on the right page. So in my opinion, space is where Silicon Valley was in 1980, maybe in 1970, and arguably in the 50s. Not many people are aware of the history of Silicon Valley. In the 50s, there was one company named Fairchild, and I don't even remember what they used to do. But one of the guys working there was a guy named Shockley who invented the transistor. And he later got together with some other folks and created Intel. And people spun off of both of those companies and created dozens of other companies. And by the time I lived in that area in the late 80s, early 90s, there were thousands of companies doing silicon-based stuff. I have a poster on my wall in my office with probably 800 companies on the poster. And I would say the vast majority of them have gone away. They've been merged, or they've gone out of business, or whatever. But some of them have succeeded. Now, I'd like to mention that, you know, we talk about bubbles. There may have, well, at some point we will have a space bubble. But one of the histories of technology bubbles is that about 1/10 of the companies will survive the bubble and the bust. But 10 years later, the value of that industry will be between 2 and 10 times the peak of the bubble. I forgot to go to my next slide here. Sorry about that. So, fortunately, Andrew has talked about several of these already. The emerging technologies, some of those are already in operation. There are commercial Earth observation systems now. You can buy pictures and you can get weather data and so forth. Tourism, as we know, is in the beginnings of that. We're all talking about spaceports, space mining, biotech. He mentioned zero gravity solutions, which I have had some involvement with. The ones over on the right are ones that people are still talking about. Situational awareness is resolving the problem of all the stuff floating around up there at 5,000 miles an hour. One of the companies that at Space Management we looked into helping with their investment is a company that has a system that is about an order of magnitude better at seeing things in space than the Air Force's system. And it's partly crowdsourced because you can actually, if you have the right kind of telescope or radio system, they can incorporate it into their network. Here's some of the problems that startups have. We all know about the launch cost, reliability, and availability. The vision problem is one that I think is endemic to the new space industry. I know several engineers that have wonderful ideas, but they don't know what to do with them. There are others that have grandiose ideas and are trying to get money to do things that, you know, if they had a 100-year payout, I'd be surprised. People resist breaking a concept into bite-sized pieces that can actually get funded and make money in the short term. SpaceX is a good example of how to make a success out of a long-term vision. Elon Musk's goal is to populate Mars, but he's not looking for somebody to put in $20 or $30 billion to invest in Mars. He's developing a business based on existing needs and capabilities. And I think he's profitable at this point. There's a lot of what I call stone soup attempts. People who have no resources, who are trying to get together and create something with impossible financials. Some people are trying to raise money in order to get enough money to raise more money, in order to get enough to raise more money to get to a $2 billion business. That's not going to work. But there are lots and lots of potential investments in small pieces of this. One of the ones I like is the carbon fiber company here in Puerto Rico that, from my understanding, can produce carbon fiber at a greatly reduced price compared to most of the existing companies. If if that's the case, that is an anchor business for the whole aerospace industry. With that capability, if you can produce carbon fiber locally at a lower cost, you can find lots of companies that want to buy carbon fiber and make things out of it. And those components are going to go into other things that will turn into larger products. I'm going to skip the stuff on the right there. So, actually, I want to go back into that a little bit. I wrote some notes myself a little while about how Puerto Rico can help and compete in this business. Focus on the smaller players, fast response, infrastructure. We talked about the Lufthansa thing. That is generating already some supports industry, and that goes right back to what I mentioned with the carbon fiber thing. That's another set of companies. You're starting to build a community. And it's hard to say how you can help that happen. Tax policy is an obvious one, but there are other things too. Education is, I think, the primary one. And giving alternatives to high-cost environments. Silicon Valley is extremely expensive. I think my daughter lived out there for a while, and she was paying over $1,000 a month rent, and she was sharing an apartment with 5 other people. And she thought she was getting a bargain. But people, at one time, Silicon Valley was, first time I went to Silicon Valley, it was full of walnut trees. I'm not sure what this note means here. Notice the unnoticed. Oh yes, we talked about small companies. SpaceX makes the news. Planetary Resources makes the news. The guy who makes space-qualified screws doesn't make the news, but he sells product to every rocket manufacturer. Whichever one is succeeding is going to buy screws from that guy if he's the best provider. And those are companies that are, they're going to give you that infrastructure that you need to develop this community. Now, I wanted to talk about education briefly. I don't really know much about the Puerto Rico education system, but the education system today is very close to being disrupted. You'll see, it turned out distance learning, distance courses in universities are rapidly taking over with excellent responses. So there's an opportunity for Puerto Rico as a self-contained environment to consider how to change your own education system to respond to what's coming in the future. And I can't give you details about that. One thing I'd really lobby for is a very early introduction to physics for one particular reason, which is separation of concerns. Physics teaches you, and I didn't learn this until I was in college, even though I had physics in high school. Physics teaches you how to separate a problem into pieces. If you look at the ocean waves out here, you can look at, you can develop functions for those waves that tell you why is this wave going that way and this one going that way. Those are actually just functions that can be added and subtracted. And that's a worldview that informs everything you do in science and in other areas too. Other areas that I think would be very important for your long term is logistics, quality assurance, precision manufacturing, and I mentioned carbon fiber already. I don't want to beat that to death. So another thing that's changing these days is space finance. It has traditionally been government funded. There's still, the big projects are still, very much funded by the government. SpaceX's gross revenue is mostly NASA at this point, I believe, although it's changing pretty quickly. Federal policies are changing. Part of the outcome of that is some interesting challenges with risk and reward and protection of investors. I'll get into that in a minute. So, Integrated Space Analytics was founded based on a crowdfunding project. We at Space Finance Group were aware of of the Integrated Space Plan, which was originally developed in 1989 by some folks at Rockwell. So we did a Kickstarter project. We raised $32,000, including $10,000 from one donor. And so let me get into this a little bit. As of this month, there are at least 450 crowdfunding companies, platforms. Oh yeah, I'll hold it up here. There we go. Was it gonna stay? Oh, cool. So a little pitch here. I brought about 10 of these with me, so if anybody's interested in buying one, we got 1, 2, so I have them right down here. We can work something out. So I can't tell you how many we sold, but we ended up raising enough money to produce this thing. We spent over a year working on it. It took over twice as long as we thought. But a major part of it was done here in Puerto Rico. Right after the Caribbean Space Summit last year, 6 of us hung out at the Caribe Hilton for a week doing the final column layout on this project. So Puerto Rico Space is already, that was about $8,000 worth of tourist money, if you will, that came because of Puerto Rico Space. So, he mentioned, Andrew mentioned Planetary Resources. They just ran a successful Kickstarter, what was it, $1.5 million for the R-Kid to send basically a camera on a tiny sat to go look at asteroids. So this is the most interesting new thing. In 2012, the federal government, the Congress passed the Jobs Act, which provided 3 methods of liberalizing investment policy. Title II allows private placement, I think 20 to 50, I don't remember the exact amount, but it has to be qualified investors, and I think it's $100,000 maximum per investor. But the paperwork is greatly reduced. You don't have to go through the whole public IPO to the level you used to have to do in any of these 3. Title II was passed, the SEC rules came out at least a year ago, maybe 2. Title IV allows $20 to $50 million IPOs with non-accredited investors with a maximum investment of 10% of your net worth. Both of these have been used quite a bit. Title III, the final vote on that is today. And Title III is the real crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding thing, which could be used by people here. It's a maximum IPO, if you will, of $1 million. And these are tentative rules. We don't really know what they finally are passing. So each investor can put in up to $100,000 for 12 months. And the amount you can put in depends on your wealth. And it requires either an independent CPA review or audit, depending on the level of IPO. Needless to say, this has scared SEC to death because it is basically eliminating a lot of or countering a lot of the reasons why the SEC was created, to protect investors. So they're working very carefully to try and figure out a way to do this without turning into a wholesale feeding frenzy among the wolves. So I sympathize with them. Here's some examples of equity crowdfunding not using Title III. All but one of these were done outside the US. Crowdfunder used, I believe, Title II, the number 4 here, the Plant Growth Net Zero Aqualife. That was a $4.5 million IPO. So this is right out of Wikipedia, by the way. So these have all happened just in the last couple of years. You can see they range from 2 million euros, 2 million pounds to 7 million euros, and I'm not going to convert. So now I'm going to do a quick little pitch. It's also descriptive. of what integrated space analytics is doing based on this Kickstarter, what started it all. Space Finance Group was already looking, we're going to need to create a company to do analytics and due diligence for our investment process. And so we were already talking about that. And then the idea of this Kickstarter came up. You know, some of the team really wanted to bring the integrated space plan back in, and bring it up to date after 20 years. Because the integrated space plan was originally done by people in the industry, including people like Bob Zubrin, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, a number of science fiction writers. So several thousand of them were printed, and there's some of them still hanging in hallways in the industry after 20 or 30 years. There was an update in 1997, so it's hung fire. So the idea of using the Kickstarter to build the integrated space plan and then turn that into an analytics company is what we decided to do. And we were successful with the Kickstarter. So, this is what it originally looked like. I will say, this version is actually more rigorous than the one we have now. There are little lines and circles and line and so forth throughout the thing, and it really does demonstrate in extremely gory detail what kinds of pieces you have to have in order to build a space program. This was built during the time when NASA ran everything. The US space program was really the big space program. No one else was really trying to do what NASA was trying to do at the time. So this still has relevance today, even though the timing is different. But things have changed. It's no longer about engineers. Ah, yes, that was familiar. So part of the criteria for this was to make it accessible to the people who aren't in the industry. We were fortunate, we had a New York design firm that helped us take the basic data and turn it into something that's actually pretty stylish. Now this, if anybody has worked with NASA or the Defense Department is familiar with quad charts, this is part of an exercise. This is one of the output formats that we're going to be doing online. I won't get into the details here. This is basically the idea. If you want to do an SBR to NASA, you will produce one of these. And basically, it's a way to force you to put the elements of your plan, your idea, your project on one page. The specifics of the format vary, but it's always in basically this format. So what we're building now, based on this original investment by the Kickstarter and about 4,000 hours, 4,000 to 5,000 hours we put into it ourselves, we now have a website. I didn't include a picture of it. There's basically crowdsourcing data. We already have somewhere around 500 page nodes about every element, and every element on that plan you saw has a reference in our website. And we're going to continue using some of the technology I discussed here to collect information. You can see here, DBpedia has 6.9 billion pieces of information in their data set that we have access to. We're also working with a number of nonprofits and other groups who are going to be crowdsourcing by curating data, contributing data, finding data that we need to do. We intend to have at least one node about every space company, every space organization, every technology, and with links in between them. This is an example of every circle in this drawing, in this design. This is actually a live picture from the web. If you click on any of those, you actually get into that data set. There's, I think, about 300 in this picture, and each of those links to another dozen or two. So we're basically building an analytics company that uses the entire resources of the internet. So we're going to have data. In fact, we already have data in our own database running on Amazon, And this will allow academics to run queries across not only our own data, but all the data we link to. And it will also be, some of the simpler stuff at least, the raw data will be available just to the public. So if you want to know about, I don't know, the Agena 5 or Agena B launcher, we already have data about that. And we're building advanced visualization tools so that you'll be able to do this live on the internet, at least some of it. Some queries are very long. We have queries that will run over a day to get to the results. So those things are going to be available only to subscriptions. And I know I'm getting very geeky here, but you may have heard the term ontology and taxonomy. This has to do with the definitions of how everything is represented in the system. So these are the URLs that get you to our online plan. We're looking for contributors, we're looking for volunteers, and we're looking for sponsors as well. We have about a dozen now. So now we can have the questions. Yeah.